Good morning. We're continuing with the laws of prayer, and we are on Kuf Ches Beis 108.2, and we're talking about Tfilas Tashlumin. We learned that the halacha is if someone forgets to daven, then for whether it's Shachris, Mincha, Marav, the next service he davens two Shemona Esreis, and that's done if somebody forgets to daven by accident or due to circumstances beyond his control. So let's pick up where we left off. Tav lo is pal mincha. Let's say someone made a mistake and he forgot to daven mincha. He forgot to pray the afternoon service. Mispalel arvis shtayim. When it comes to marv, he davens two shmona esreis. Harishona arvis v'hashniya l'tashlumin. The first shmona esrei that he davens at marv will be to fulfill his obligation for marv, and the second shmona esrei will be a tashlumin, will be the makeup shmona esrei for mincha. And we discussed last time what happens if he switches those. Tavelo is palal arvis. If he made a mistake and didn't daven the evening service, mispalal shachar shtayim, then he prays two shmona esreis at the morning service. Harishona shachars v'ashniya l'tashlumin. The first shmona esrei is for shachars, for the morning service, and the second shmona esrei is tashlumin, is a makeup. La'achar she'amar yotzer u'shmona esrei brachos. After, in the morning, after he says Yotzer, he says the blessings of Shema, and he says the Shemona Esrei, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to say after he says Tachnon also. Yomer Ashrei ve'achar kach yispal Shemona Esrei l'tashlumei arvis. So after that, he says Ashrei, and then he davens a second time for the tashlumin of Marv. So if someone forgot Marv one day, the next day at Shachris, what he does is he davens Shachris regular until Tachnun, and then after Tachnun, he says Ashrei, and then he davens a second Shmona Esrei. Says the Rama, V'chein kim shemispalel arvis shtayim mishum shelo hispalel mincha yomer Ashrei ben tefila l'tefila. So too, when a person forgot mincha, and therefore he's davening two Marvs, he davens two Shmona Esreis for Marav. But the Ramah says that you don't just daven Shmona Esrei finish and then daven a Shmona Esrei again, but after your first Shmona Esrei, you say Ashrei, and then you daven your second Shmona Esrei. So we put an Ashrei between the two Shmona Esreis. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us that at Marav we don't actually do this. At Marav, the Kabbalists argue on the Ramah, and they say not to say Ashrei at night. But if one says it, it's fine. And the same thing for Mincha, the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us. If someone forgot Shachris, so therefore he's davening two Minchas, so what he does is he davens Mincha regular, and then he doesn't just daven a second Shmona Esrei, but first he says another Ashrei, and then davens a second Shmona Esrei. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Shachris, Shtayim, v'asur lachal kodem shispal l'shniya. We know there's a law that we don't eat before we daven Shmona Esrei in the morning, because before we take care of our own needs, we want to pray to Hashem. So the Mishnah Berurah says that's also the halacha before davening the second Shmona Esrei. So if a person forgot to daven Marav, and he wakes up and he realizes he has to daven two Shmona Esreis for Shachris, before he davens the second Shmona Esrei, he still is not allowed to eat. He has to daven both Shmona Esreis before he's allowed to eat. It's the time to daven. He says, however, if you started eating in error, you don't have to stop. That's the opinion of the Magen Avraham. However, he brings from the Machzor Shekel, the Magen Gibarim, that really, even if you started eating in error after your first Shmona Esrei, so after your first Shmona Esrei, you sat down to have breakfast, he says that they say that you should stop because the goal is that we want to have the second Shmona Esrei as close to the first Shmona Esrei as possible. But lechatchila, for sure, one should not eat until he davens the second Shmona Esrei. One shouldn't learn between them. The reason is, we mentioned this last time, that the Shmona Esrei, for the makeup Shmona Esrei, has to be at a time when a person is involved in davening. But he says the person is allowed to listen to the Chazan's repetition before he does the second Shmona Esrei. So you don't have to, daven Shmona Esrei and then right away go into your second Shmona Esrei. You could listen to the repetition. Vayin la'el simim zayin sif zayin shekasanu b'shem bir alacha b'shem or zerua. Shmona Esrei brachos. Like we mentioned in Shachos, you should say Tachnan before you do the second Shmona Esrei. De'en lahavsik ben Shmona Esrei l'Tachnan, because we don't interrupt between Shmona Esrei and Tachnan. Yomer Ashrei kedei la'amud gam betfilas tashlumin betoch divrei tanchumin shel Torah. The reason we say Ashrei before Shmona Esrei is because we want to daven Shmona Esrei amidst words of supplication of Torah. Ukanal b'simin Tzadi Gimel v'gam dehabalav hachi yetzarich lamer Ashrei kodem lo nitzeach aval tzion yamerno achshav v'lo yamer achar kach. And anyway, in Shachris there's a second Ashrei, so we're saying the second Ashrei now to take care of that. V'ayin b'achronim sheskimu dehu adinim mispal mincha shtayim b'shvil hashlama yomer gam ken od apam Ashrei. This is what we mentioned before, that when a person davens 2 minchas, he should say another Ashrei. V'chozehu rak lechatchila, and this is only the preferred practice. This is just the preferred practice, but really, according to the letter of the law, you can really daven 2 Shmona Esreis back to back as long as you wait a couple seconds in between. But the preferred practice is to say Ashrei in between the 2 Shmona Esreis. Bain, kedei lahashlim bazeh gam ha'ashrei shahayat tzarich lo merkodem mincha. So now we're talking about saying Ashrei. Let's say you didn't daven mincha and you're davening 2 marivs. Do you say Ashrei between marivs? So the Ramah said yes, and the reason is because if you miss mincha, you also forgot Ashrei at mincha. So you should say Ashrei at mariv. However, the Mishnah Berurah cites there are Latter-day authorities that write in the names of the Kabbalists. You should not say Ashrei in the evening, even if you're making up for mincha. Then he says you should be stringent because of B'derech HaChaim to not say it. But the Derech Chaim says, whatever you do, you have who to rely on. But during the day, you should say Ashrei for sure, even after Mincha. So this Kabbalistic thing of not saying Ashrei at night is just actually at night. But during Mincha, after Mincha, if it's still daytime, there's no issue. Okay, and the Zohar says that even when you're saying Ashrei at Mincha twice, if you forgot Shachris and you're davening Mincha twice, you have to say another Ashrei. The Zohar says you shouldn't have in mind that you're saying Ashrei because you're required to, but you're just reading it like it's like you're reading the Torah. And again, the reason that we say Ashrei, so just to summarize, let's summarize first. If you're davening 2 Shachrises, you say Ashrei in between. And if you're davening 2 minchas, you say Ashrei in between. But at Mariv, it sounds like we don't say it because of this Kabbalistic idea. And the reason we want to say Ashrei before a second Shmona Esrei is that our davening should be said after supplication of Torah, which is Ashrei. Okay, stop here for today. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out, and hope everyone has a beautiful day.